Friday from Ingle Magazine, Mr. Kevin Woodley. Kevin, how are you, sir?
Good, boys. How are you?
Well, doing pretty good here on this Friday as we head into a pretty big matchup against the Edmonton Oilers, and you know exactly where I'm going with this. Thatcher Demko, obviously all the talk has been about him in these parts as he slowly starts to make his way back into the lineup, or we don't know if it's going to be tomorrow or next week, but fans are going to look for it for wins and losses, so you obviously know the position very well. When you look at a guy who's taken this much time off, what are you looking for when he gets back in on the action?
Well, I mean, the first thing I've looked for this week, and it's there in spades, is sort of pace and precision of movement. He's flying out there. There are zero limitations to what he is doing physically. And frankly, I don't think there's been any that I saw since Tuesday. Dynamic drills, you tend to run through progressions. The goalie coach will work you through sort of movement patterns. Then you add butterfly. Everything's controlled shooting early on. Last step is usually get into post integrations, and then you get into dynamic play where, guys can go wherever they want with rebounds or breakaways. And, again, things that put a goaltender under duress in terms of not knowing where the puck is coming from, where his next push is, that can make him have to go side to side multiple times in short order. And I saw all of that by the time they got through practice yesterday. Wednesday in particular at the morning skate, I stuck around while everybody went into the room and watched him and Ian Clark and Casey DeSmith and the scratches work. And there was just no indication of any physical limitation at this point. Now, the one thing that still has to happen is you got to get out there when the bullets are flying for real, right? And find that little tiny black puck through 10 bodies, half of whom are trying to keep it hidden from you. And that's not easy. There's a certain reliance on rhythm and timing that you can only get from playing games. He thinks 2 games is going to be enough. The target, as Thatcher told us yesterday, was always Tuesday, which is what I was led to believe as well. And my hunch is they stick with it, even though Rick Tocchet said he's ahead of schedule right now. And as I said, the physical limitations, there doesn't appear to be any. But 2 games, take a look at the preseason. I put it that way, right? You're not coming back for the first game of the season. Obviously, the intensity has ramped up by this time of the year. So it's not quite the same as starting a year, but most starting goalies only play 2.5 games in the preseason. And then, they drop the puck and they go. And there was no better goalie in the National Hockey League for the first 6 weeks of the regular season than Thatcher Demko. That's where his Vezina case was built primarily. He was the best in the league by a he lapped the field for the first 6 weeks. And so that's what you're hoping for, right? That gives you optimism. And as much as he didn't want to discuss it yesterday, the reality is he has done this before. He knows what it's like to come back midseason and work through those progressions and then pop into a game. So, a lot of positive signs for Canucks fans, I think, in what we've seen from Thatcher on the ice, even if you don't see him tomorrow night in Edmonton, which, like I said, my hunch would be you don't. Don't worry if that's the case, outside of what it means maybe to the division title.
What did you see from Silovs and DeSmith while Demko was out? And do you think goaltending cost the Canucks a few wins over the last few weeks?
Listen, cost the Canucks, statistically, both of them are a little underwater, right? But this is a tough team to play behind right now because they're not giving up much, in terms of quantity. And they're still giving up in moments when the mistakes happen, like every team does. This isn't a criticism. There's still those quality moments. And one of the hardest things for a goaltender to do is to sit there for lengthy periods of time, watch the other goalie play really well at the other end, and then have an odd man rush or a grade A scoring chance against you, right? It's really not easy to be a goalie behind a team that's only given up 21, 22 a night, and it kills your stats because 3 on 22 is a lot different than 3 on 30. And so I think, they're underwater in terms of the underlying numbers as well, both of them. The 881 for Silovs, 882 for DeSmith. Since the injury, neither one are, that's not great. Cost them games. Are there some games they win with Thatcher Demko in net? You could easily make that argument. I'd even go to the Colorado game, right? The goal with 1.8 or 2.7 seconds left in the second period that sort of got the legs under the Colorado Avalanche. I think Thatcher Demko has a chance to make that save just because he's 4 inches taller and he has that much extra length in his push across. So there are things that he does at such a high level. I don't think it's fair to say to make that comparison because if these guys were Thatcher Demko, none of this would matter, right? That's just the level Demko lives at. So Yeah, there's been some moments. I think Silovs at times has been a little aggressive and chased it a little bit. But what I've liked is he reels it in. Casey's clearly fighting the confidence a little bit right now, but he's been so good for them for so long. I'm frankly curious to see which way they go Saturday in Edmonton, assuming it's not Demko.
DeSmith is a UFA at the end of the season. How would you approach the backup situation for next season? Have you seen enough in Silovs to have some confidence that he could hold the fort down? And there's, of course, the added wrinkle that he is likely exempt from waivers next season, meaning you can kind of shuttle him up and down and get creative in how you fill that backup role for next season.
Well, I mean, I can't remember which, Hall of Fame manager was the first to say this, but I'm fond of the statement that if you have time, use it. And I think that applies to goaltending as well, right? So I think, a lot of times this can end up being a decision made on finances. And if the backup goalie market inflates to the point where it's going to cost them somewhere else on the roster because they can't afford, whether it's a Hronek or Dakota Joshua or just filling out the rest of the roster with all their UFAs, maybe Arturs Silovs becomes the best option because he's the least expensive and you trust him. You know what you have in him. What I've liked about Silovs is he's kind of always growing, right? Like even last year, the first game wasn't great, but by the time he got to the fifth, he looked like an NHL goalie. So that confidence can grow with time. Is his game perfect? No. If it was, we wouldn't be asking any of these questions. Like there's a development curve here. There's things that he has to learn as he goes. Could he learn them in the American League? He'd probably argue that he's ready to learn them in the National Hockey League. And I think that's a fair argument. But there's some, again, you need three. At the end of the day, no matter what, we're seeing it right now. You need three. So is your third, your number two in Vancouver, and he's got some NHL experience. You trust him to put him in, or even, as you said, maybe the idea of flip-flopping them. Ian Clark did that with Jonas Korpisalo when he was in Columbus. The Nashville Predators did it with UC Saros early in his development, where you're with the team all week practicing, but if you don't play a bunch and the number one, and in Nashville's case, it was a Pekka Rinne. Here it would obviously be a Thatcher Demko. Say Thatcher's playing on Saturday. And Abbotsford's got games Friday and Sunday or Saturday and Sunday. Well, then you call the other guy up, you pluck him on the bench behind Demko, and you let Arturs go down and play too until it's his turn to play. But he's still an NHL goalie. He's around the team every day. He's working with Ian Clark. There's lots of different options. And I honestly think you need to find one you trust to play games in the NHL in all three spots. They have two of them. And where that third one fits in, whether it's primarily AHL or primarily NHL, will probably depend on the price tag.
I'm going to add the Oilers into this because it's a kind of an interesting conversation to have. So, the Canucks have Thatcher Demko. We know, obviously, the Nashville Predators have UC Saros and what he's been. But between the Oilers, the Vegas Golden Knights, and the LA Kings, which of those teams have the most confidence in their starting netminder?
Well, it's kind of hard to argue against Vegas given their guy won a cup, right? Yeah. But honestly, as long as they don't crater in terms of how they play and all of a sudden start bleeding odd man rush chances like they were before they moved on Jay Woodcroft at the start of the season, I think it's fair to argue with Stuart Skinner. He's been that good, and it's really easy. It's not going to show up in the raw numbers, really. Actually, it's not going to show up in any of the numbers until you get rid of everything from October to mid-November. That's how bad it was. They were dead last in the NHL in high danger chances off the rush, and his numbers were terrible. Frankly, they sent down Jack Campbell. His numbers were better than Stuart Skinner's at the time. Since then, they're top two in the NHL in chances off the rush, and Stuart Skinner's performing at a level, whereas if the season did start on November, you'd be making arguments, or November 16th after the coaching change, you'd be making arguments he should be in the Vezina Trophy conversation. He's been that good since the coaching change. Now, obviously within that, what does that tell you? Rush chances, odd man rush chances, high danger chances, those are the toughest ones for any goalie, but his numbers, even after the change, when they do give those up, he's underwater on those numbers. They're not pretty. It's the one sort of remaining weakness in his game. He's not a great skater. He does everything so well in in-zone play, but off the rush, he tends to get caught a little bit. And so, that's the caveat. You continue to play like this, you don't give up those chances. And certainly, I think the Oilers are like the Leafs a few years ago. Everybody used to think of them as this running gun team. They're not. They're really good defensively, especially they were last year and they are again this year since the coaching change. We could probably do a whole show trying to figure out why Jay Woodcroft changed the systems in the offseason, because that led to a lot of this, I believe. And Skinner's right in that conversation, guys. Like right in that conversation. Since mid-November, his numbers are right up there with Thatcher Demko. As a matter of fact, if you take away Demko's first 6 weeks and Skinner's first 6 weeks, Skinner's been better statistically. So he's probably the one with the most to lose, which probably isn't fair for a guy who's in his second year in the NHL to put all that pressure on him because he's just a second-year pro. But that's how good he's been, and that's how heavily they rely on him. Because after that, Picard's been great, but is he a guy you're putting in a playoff situation? I don't know. And Jack Campbell's turned things around in the minors, but again, if you've got to go to him in the playoffs, where's the trust level? I don't have that answer, but I do think there's a ton of trust in Stuart Skinner, who, listen, I'm biased. I've known that kid since working at Hockey Canada POE camp, and his mental approach throughout all this, back when nobody even saw him as a high potential guy with mid-round pick kind of expectations. He was at that Hockey Canada camp with really probably no chance of making that World Junior team. And yet look at where he is not that much later. It's a real credit to him and his mindset and his approach throughout in his hometown with a huge family and a lot of extra stuff going on. And also a credit to a guy who gets maligned a lot in that market, Dustin Schwartz, the goalie coach, who sort of picked him, was at that camp as well, picked him based, I think, in part on their work together at that camp and the potential he saw, and has helped bring this guy along, I think, at a clip and a rate that far exceeds what anybody would have expected.
You mentioned the mindset thing, and I think it brings to an interesting conversation that we can talk about forever when it comes to the goaltending position. But we know Thatcher Demko. I mean, Harm, you've covered him for a long time as well. I know you have Kevin as well. Ian Clark's the goaltending coach in Vancouver. But I think for me, the mindset is the biggest thing. Thatcher Demko, we know, is a guy of very few words, especially when the microphones are in front of him and things like that. So how do you think he's approaching heading into this? He's had a month off. He's done it before, but this time there's expectation. Like, the team's good. They have a legitimate shot, or at least they believe they do. So where do you think he's at as he heads into the final week of the season here?
Yeah, I talked about Skinner's mindset, and it's a growth mindset. Like, even when things were bad, he was always looking for ways to get better. Like Demko, let's just say, he's become a sort of human. I used to say this about Carey Price. They play differently, but they're a human how-to video on the ice, like how to goalie. And for Demko, it's very much Ian Clark's system. Like, if you want to know what Ian Clark's system is all about, watch Thatcher Demko play goal. It's a how-to video. There are other people around the league, the way he moves in and out of his posts. Like, there are other goalie coaches and goalies around the league that marvel at it. I've talked to other NHL goalies that are like, man, you got video you can share of Demko working in practice because this is great. So I don't worry about that. But the other thing I don't worry about is his mindset. We had a really good chat after that scrum session yesterday, and he's so competitive. Like, coming back off this injury, guys, like, this wasn't, I know the Canucks made it seem like this was always going to be the case in terms of him being ready for the playoffs, but the timeline on this injury wasn't the case. Like, he's way ahead. When he talked about that extra work and the determination that he put in to get back here, it's legit. I love that he thanked everyone else who was involved. Like, he is so determined. He is so focused. I don't worry about the way he approaches the game mentally. Obviously, he's got, I believe, is he a psychology major or minor, but he's got that as part of his schooling. But also, I know he wouldn't give me the name when we talked about it last year, but he's got somebody he works with, like somebody who's just like next level that he works with. And so, yeah, I'm not worried about it. Like, pressure does strange things to people at times, and there's going to be no shortage of it here a week from now for the Vancouver Canucks and their number one goaltender. But it's almost the last thing I worry about with Thatcher Demko. Like, he's so driven. He's so focused. He does all the right things. He's a pro's pro when it comes to goaltending. And for all those reasons, maybe Canucks Nation is a little stressed. I'm not worried about it. Like, it's impossible to predict anything could happen, but that's one of the guys I just do not worry. And I think we look at the bubble, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing too, when he came back last year, he was coming back to a new system. All his reads were, so we looked at the numbers after he came back with Tocchet. Yeah, the defense was better than it was when he left under Boudreau. It's kind of hard not to be. But it was all new to him, where guys go and how you read off that as a goaltender. We do these pro reads videos with NHL goalies, and I did a 45-minute video session with Demko. Shameless plug. It's at ingoalmag.com. If you ever want to sit down and watch video with Thatcher Demko, you can do it through our website. And everything was new to him under Tocchet. Like, it's not just what the other team is trying to do and read handedness and where the hips are and what they're showing for a release. Are they shooting or passing? All that. Are they going to, low, high? Do I need to go into my post? All those, like, it's almost like being an NFL quarterback. I'd argue it's harder. Sorry, Farhan. But the amount of information these guys process in real time is staggering. And a lot of it is reading off where their defensemen are supposed to be and whether they can trust them to be there. And when he came back last year, that was all new, and it all changed while he was out. So this year coming back, and Tocchet talked about this yesterday, it's not anymore. Like, this is now stuff that he's familiar with and knows what to expect. So again, I think he'll be even more prepared this time around to sort of hit the ground running. And I'm not worried about it just being 2 starts. The only thing I worry about it being 2 starts is if they don't mean anything and they start resting guys, and these guys don't play in these 2 games the way they would normally play, because then how do I build my reads if nobody's doing what they're supposed to do?
Elsewhere in the West, it's been really interesting to track Dallas's goaltending situation because Jake Oettinger, for most of the season, hasn't played up to his potential. The last 9 games, he's won 8 of them, .937 save percentage. What have you seen from Oettinger this season? And if he's finding this type of form heading into the playoffs, do you like Dallas as the best team in the West?
I don't know about best team. I mean, certainly, like, they looked great in here. And again, like, the Canucks were right in that game till, a needless penalty in the 3rd period. So even in the losses, I've kind of been like trying to be, get off the bridge, voice of reason. Like, they've been in all these games, even during the quote unquote slump. If Ottinger's on, like, they're a contender, right? We know how deep they are. I think when they were in here, it was 8 20-goal scorers, with Ben soon to become their 9th, which is a franchise record for the Stars. We know how good they are on the back end. They rely less on Ryan Suter back there, which is a positive as well. Like, they're not taxing him the way they used to be. And so the only question was Jake Oettinger, who, you're right, when he came into Vancouver, I think he's running at 896 at that point. Now he's won like 8 of 9 or 8 in a row or 9 in a row. He's on an absolute heater. You always knew he was capable of it. There's enough of a resume there. We know what the pedigree is. Why it wasn't happening, I had a brief conversation with him after. And this is the one thing about goaltending. It's kind of, Irf, you can relate to this. I know you golf. You can't try harder. You might, like, I could see you as a first tee guy just going out there and swinging out of your ass, but it usually doesn't work very well, does it?
Nope.
Puck's got to come to you as a goalie, man. You can't force it. It's one of the hardest things to do. And Jake kind of admitted to me after the game here in Vancouver that he'd gotten to that point where he was thinking about the whole season and how it hadn't been what's expected of him, what he expects of himself. And so you try and fix it every time. So you're trying to go out there and basically erase an entire season when the only thing you can do as a goaltender is focus on the next shot, the next play, the next pass, maintain on top of that sequence. If you start thinking big picture out there, you're dead. And he did. So he's playing a little deeper. He's letting the game come to him. He's not forcing anything. And it sounds silly, but it's just like, talk to goalies, whether they're Hall of Famers. Henrik Lundqvist used to call it relaxed intensity. He really struggled with it at times in his career. You want it so bad, and you have to battle. It's part of the job. But it's such a fine line between battling and sort of overdoing it and not letting the puck come to you. And Jake found himself on the wrong side of that equation. With a few technical tweaks, positional, tactical, and sort of mindset switches, he looks like the old Jake Oettinger, and that should be scary for the rest of the Western Conference because he has the ability to be that good, as we saw in that Calgary series.
Kevin Woodley, call sign Maverick. Don't think, just do. Thank you very much for this. So we appreciate your insight as always. One of the best. And thank you. Yep.
The line, Irf, is actually, if you think out there, you're dead.
Yeah, that is true.
That's the actual line. And just so you know, I've actually used that with NHL goalies as a reference point. Roberto Luongo looked at me like I had 3 heads because he hadn't seen Top Gun. So I'm very grateful that there was a second Top Gun. So the next generation now knows exactly what I'm talking about when I use the line.
You're the best, Kevin. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Take care, guys.
Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.